Well, the other day I interviewed a gentleman by the name of James Thompson. Look, he's a dynamic leader and he's redefining the essence of modern leadership. And the episode here is called The Leader is the Conductor of the Orchestra. So we had a great conversation about the conductor and the orchestra and how it all works and how that relates to leadership. The other thing is we talked about getting in your helicopter and having that helicopter view of the world. The other question or sort of areas we covered off was how to be adaptable, but also approaching the brick wall. Interesting question, concept. So sit back and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you here with us. I've got a wonderful guest with me today. His name is James Thompson. James, a massive welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Lovely to join you and the listeners.
Excellent. Now, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I'm based in a regional city called Bendigo in central Victoria, about 90 minutes drive north of the Melbourne International Airport.
Okay, good. And is it quite a large population there of people?
Bendigo is a population of approximately 135,000, regional city.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, good. And so the other thing I wanted to know is more about your background. What have you done in relation to your background and what do you do today as well?
Well, firstly, I was raised on a small mixed dryland farm, 70 kilometres northwest of Bendigo in central Victoria, educated there at the local Wedderburn High School. And my career really has been a matrix, if you like, traversing local government at a senior executive role at a very young age of 23, leading through to CEO role in local government, and then moving into not-for-profit stream in aged care, health services, particularly for vision impaired, tourism, also executive management in recruitment, and 18 years across 3 large family businesses in agribusiness and food manufacturing. Chicken meat. So if you think of a plate, I was working around chicken meat, salads and veggies, and duck meat. 3 large family businesses, largest being staff of 850 people and turnover of Australian dollars 250 million. And more recently been supporting my son as a advisory board member on a company called WorkPod and providing executive advisory services to that business. And I'm about to start another senior role with a small boutique heritage property in central Victoria.
Excellent. So a wide range of different roles and experiences and industries and so forth. Tell me, the local government role, 23-year-old, being in a leadership role, what was that like for you?
Very difficult in the sense I was assistant town clerk of the city of Castlemaine, a little municipality comprising 15,000 people in central Victoria, just south of Bendigo. And what made it a little bit more challenging was that within 3 months of me actually starting in the role, as 23-year-old, the town clerk of the municipality decided to resign and move into another local area. And so here I was, 23, acting town clerk, representing the community at council meetings and dealing with all the machinations that go on with local community politics and community affairs. And I must admit, it was a very challenging time, but it's one of those experiences where you either sink or you swim. And my background at a very young age prepared me for that role if I look back. And so that was my first professional executive role at that young age of 23.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And then you went from the local government then into what other industry? What business was that afterwards?
Local government restructured in Victoria in 1993. And I used that time to re-educate myself. My tertiary qualifications had been as a diploma of business majoring in local government. And I thought, I'll go out and re-educate myself at one of the world's best business schools, Melbourne Business School, associated with the University of Melbourne. And after 16 months of that executive program, came back into the world in the not-for-profit area with Vision Australia, as a regional manager of the Loddon Mallee region, spanning a distance from Bendigo, 4 hours up to Mildura. It was a massive area.
Yep.
Spent a couple of years there and then moved into tourism, managing CEO of a heritage tourism trust.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking the question is that, just to get clarity there, is that going from local government into not-for-profit, then from not-for-profit into the tourism side, the transition from public service, then into a not-for-profit, then into a private organisation, if it was private, it may not have been. Those transitions and you actually leading in those different areas, what was that like for you? Because they're not always the same.
No, they're not always the same, but what I found was local government was a good foundational preparation area for me for where I went. So streaming in from the public sector, which obviously had a very, very strong compliance requirement built in and around it. And as we know, as time has gone on, the compliance requirements on not only public companies, but also private companies. So there was and that prepared me, that strong compliance requirement, and also the machinations of dealing with a variety of stakeholders, a great preparing ground for the other industries that I went into. And also particularly dealing with family businesses was a little bit like dealing with local council community politics. The family in a lot of ways, particularly if you had a couple of different families together and the children and cousins and the like, was very much like a small community as such. So it was a good preparing ground. Local government was a great preparing ground.
Yeah. Sounds like it too, because as with different family businesses, and if there's multiple families, it can be very tricky.
Yes.
And what's going on there, yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you was in relation to going from local government into not-for-profit into other organisations as well. What was one thing that you could apply right across the board as a leader, whether it be local government, not-for-profit, or into the private sector? Was there something you could apply from a leadership perspective right across the board?
Humility.
Yeah.
Without question. And respect and care. Look, humility, the main one, without question. You have to park your ego, put it in the back of the car, or don't put it in the car when you go to work. But certainly, humility and have respect for your common human being, the common person in the street. And there's the two main things that I took out of local government into those other areas.
Do you see that today in business and in the world, that there is that humility and also respect for for your peers and so forth? Do you see that a lot today, or is it missing?
There's certainly a greater move in what's seen as foundational leadership, that greater humility and care and respect for each other. Like if I go back in time, it was very much the autocratic command and control form of, I would consider, traditional management, where the boss was telling, be it he or she, particularly more so he than she in years gone by, telling staff to, again, effectively, you leave your brains in the car, come to work, and I'll tell you what to do. Whereas today we've transitioned, thankfully, into that more humanistic approach to leadership.
Yep. So that's good to hear. Now, the other side is that you talked before about WorkPod, and for listeners, if you don't know what WorkPod is, recently I interviewed the CEO for WorkPod. WorkPod is whereby there is what we call an international team, a team of virtual assistants or other people that can do different skills in that, and they may be based in another country, like the Philippines, and you can engage them to do some work for you. Now, you're on the executive advisory side of things and that for that organisation and doing some other things as well going forward. When you are in that executive advisory role, based on all your experience before, James, what are some things that you are trying to do to help an organisation understand from an executive advisory board? What would be one or two things you might want them to help them understand? I'm not just talking about WorkPod, because it sounds like you do it for others as well, but what were those things?
Primarily what I'm focused on is risk management with the business, and particularly with the association with WorkPod is an organisation that's gone from 0 staff to 500 staff in 2 years. Yeah. So my background has been, particularly with these large-scale family businesses with multiple sites, I have a background, I don't pretend to be an expert, but an experience in dealing with scaling up. And it's the importance of being able to sit back and actually have that helicopter view of the world. And as the old saying, you can spend too much time in the business and not on the business, but have that helicopter view and be able to come in and look at all aspects of the value chain of the business and what areas that you see gaps, risks, issues to the business that can be remedied and identified and remedied. So that's the role that I'm principally playing with work. And typically when I'm providing it, executive advisory service to other organisations, doing a similar thing, coming in and looking at it from a risk management perspective.
Yeah, that's good. Good to know. Because I tell you what, I'm sure there's a lot of organisations who are stuck in the weeds. They're not getting in those helicopters and reviewing and thinking about things, but also really good for having you on board in the sense that you've had those experiences before. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're bringing that to the table, which is brilliant. I think it's all about actually making sure that when we have a business or when we're leading an organisation, that we bring the right players to come and play in the game with us or to the table to help us see things. Because sometimes we can see things through our lens, but somebody else might come on board and do something and it's a totally different look or feel that maybe we don't even understand or even see. And I think that's a very, very important role that you play.
Yes. And the thing is that I've found, Philippines being my first international assignment as such, is you have to be cognizant of the cultural differences. You can't assume what's actually happening here in Australia or New Zealand in our Western world as such is going to apply in the Philippines, in that Asian world. So you've got to be quite cognizant of that and be patient, humble, to actually sit back. Again, I'm often fond of saying analogies, but act like an elephant, look, listen and learn, and take a quiet approach to dealing with change with a culture that is quite different to your own.
Yeah, totally. People in the Philippines, fantastic workers, really, really, really great. And I've loved working with them in the past and now as well. I love what you just said there about be like an elephant, right? Look, listen and learn. And that's that part of that patience side of things too, because I find that a lot of organizations in many countries try and go into that organization or to that country and try and put their way into it. It may not work. You'll have to do some tweaking, but if you don't, then it's going to fail. Yeah. Important. Very important. Hey, James, how did you actually get into leadership yourself?
Well, I look at leadership, everyone is a leader. An individual is a leader of themselves. Where everyone's a leader at some point or level in organisational life. And you may not want to be a leader, but it can find you. And if I look back at my life, and leadership found me at a very early age. I think I was probably six or seven, and found me in a fairly dramatic way. I was raised, I don't mind in saying it, I don't seek sympathy in saying it, but raised in a dysfunctional family of alcohol-fueled domestic violence.
Right.
And had a situation where mum and dad, mum in a state of frustration and fury, arguing with my father and screaming out that she's going to kill these bip kids on a small country farm. And being involved in that sort of environment, I instinctively just rustled up my brother and sister, I think, as I said, I think 6 or 7 at the time, and took a leadership role. I didn't want to find leadership, but instinctively, in that fear that was going on at the time, and the care and protection, is just grabbing my brother and sister and taking them up to the back of the farm to protect them. So leadership found me at a young age. And it actually, when I look back on my experiences, it actually helped forge in me a resilience and durability to handle a lot of things in my working life, particularly through the pandemic, with what all businesses, families, everyone had to deal with as leaders, getting through the pandemic. But so, yeah, leadership to me finds everyone at some point in time, and everyone within an organisation, whatever level, whatever point they are in the organisation, is a leader. It's not just the CEO, everyone.
At all levels within the organisation, people are leaders. And a great, what you said, it starts with us, you as an individual. That concept you talked about, that sometimes you may not want to be the leader, but sometimes leadership finds you. And actually it's quite interesting, that whole topic, because I think you and I could probably actually have a big conversation around it. Because I've seen scenarios whereby people don't want to do the role, but the environment, the organisation, people around them are wanting them to be the leader. Or it's almost like that deserves their leadership, is the way I like to say it. And so sometimes something may happen and it forces that hand, but it's actually the right thing to happen. It's the right thing for the organization. And I find a lot of people feel like they're not ready for it, though. And James, I don't know about you, but I don't think you'll ever be ready for it. That's part of the growth, part of the fun, if you can call it that, of the journey, right?
Yeah, exactly. And look, I shunned as a young boy coming up through school. You can perhaps be a reflection of your own environment. And growing up, and I was quite reserved, quiet. I was well regarded, but despite some of my early things where the example I gave, I demonstrated leadership, I was a little bit, as I said, reserved, introverted, and shunned a little bit. The other young children around me would see me as a leader, like I was elected captains of sports teams and the like. But in fact, at the time there, I think back to that I actually shunned leadership because the school wanted to appoint me, the children wanted to appoint me as the president of the Student Representative Council at the high school. And I remember this day because I knew what was going to happen. The votes were going to be all cast in my way. I went home for dinner and didn't come back. So they couldn't elect me.
Oh, no. Wow.
So,
Yeah.
At times I tried to avoid leadership, but it found me again going into my local government career and just applying myself through my studies. And again, leadership found me.
It's interesting how it all works out. Yeah. Hey, look, this person can be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
A past leader that quickly comes to mind as a young man growing up in 1979 to 1990 was the late and great Margaret Thatcher, who served as the UK Prime Minister for those 11 years between 1979 and 1990. And as I said, at a young age for myself, what really impressed me with Margaret was her steely resolve and conviction to solve problems. Not everyone agreed with her, but she would leave, without question, a legacy of great respect for her efforts. I vividly recall the Falklands Islands War incident with Argentina and her great strength and resolve to solve that crisis. She was a woman for her times. She was a woman, without question, a leader of action.
Leader of her times. Yeah. I don't know about you, but for me sometimes, and I know it's different times and so forth, but for Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill, for me, it was very like similar parallels, similar kind of scenarios, but it was different times when they happened. And she was great. Now, I presume that you didn't meet Margaret Thatcher. You haven't met with her personally?
No.
All right, so here's another question for you. If you and Margaret Thatcher happened to be sitting on a park bench having a coffee together, what would be one question you would love to ask her?
I'd love to ask Margaret the secrets of her own success.
Wonder what she would say.
I think she'd say, have the power of your own convictions. Be certainly one thing she would say, I think. I may be wrong.
I actually think you're right. I actually think she would say that, based on what you said earlier on, but also what we've witnessed with her too. Very good question. You know what? I asked that question with a lot of people that I interview, and I just like, I wish we actually had that opportunity to ask her or him, depending on who their leaders are of the past, that question. And some people I interview too, James, the person is alive still, but they haven't met them yet. And so they're like, actually, I would love to go now and ask them that question. So a bit of a prompt to help them go ahead and do it. We'll see what happens for some people too. Now, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. When I mentioned that title or that statement, what does it mean for James?
Well, it's trite to say, but there's nothing surer in life than change. And if anything, as time goes on, we see with product life cycles and the like, very much shrinking. Things are happening so much quicker, and we see with the evolution now of AI and the pace of that change. Or you go back to the internet in the early 90s, where we've come from the early 90s to 24 today, and now we've got AI exploding all in and around us. There is nothing surer in life than change. So we do live in a dynamic, organic world. Evolution, revolution. Things can change through evolution or revolution. And leadership's no different. Like as I talked about earlier about, we've gone from, through my career, the old command and control autocratic structures where were evident with leaders, typically the crusty males, basically told people what to do and how to do it, all driven from the top down. basically come to work, as I said before, put your brains in the boot of the car and we'll tell you what to do. And I can recall in my tertiary studies, the famous name of Chainsaw Dunlop from the US, good old Chainsaw. The nickname just tells you all about the nature of that type of leadership. And Chainsaw was famous for organisational change to him. Well, as you can imagine, start up the chainsaw and cut a swathe through the organisation. There was nothing humanistic about that at all. That was his way to create a better world. He was even known as Rambo in pinstripes. He was photographed once wearing an ammo belt across his chest. So we've come a long way from those days. For the better, we've come a long way. Successful organisations today are, as they should, be adopting a humanistic approach to their leadership. There's a greater sense of leadership at all levels, embracing people in organisations, genuinely engaging people, seeking out their ideas and input. It's not all about you as a leader, wherever you are in the organisation. It's about empowering those in and around you, taking on their ideas, sorting out those ideas together, not in a unilateral fashion, but together. I liken a leader to, you're effectively like a conductor of an orchestra, the good leaders. If you're not a good leader, the tune you play is not going to be very good. But that's what you are. You're a conductor of an orchestra. There's got to be people responsible within organisations. It can't be, otherwise it's just chaos. But as I said to a point earlier, everyone's a leader in the organisation, but you have to have leaders of teams. Everyone can't be doing their own thing, but there's got to be a common vision that you're striving for.
They also, going back to the analogy you used around the conductor side of things, I love that with the orchestra, as the conductor of an organisation, is that everyone's got to be on the same page and be playing the same music off the same page. Otherwise, it's going to sound not right. It's not going to be that music where it hums beautifully or it just plays beautifully. Very important to be that conductor. I like that analogy a lot. It's really good. You mentioned it before about the internet, and then we're into the AI. It's quite interesting to see that people were thinking about the internet. That's not going to survive. It's only here for a little while, and then look at that, what happened. AI, same thing. Hey, we'll see where that's going to go. But the thing is, we're finding that technology is making the world or the pace of things go faster. As you mentioned before, it's a dynamic world. It is changing a lot. And so with data, social, business, technology, all of that, when we think about that, what makes a leader successful in today's fast-paced, ever-changing world? What's your thoughts?
You've got to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. You have to look, and AI is going to actually help this immensely with div analysis. Like the pace of change is such that big bureaucratic structures organisations, in my view, might be wrong, but find it difficult. But increasingly people in organisational life is going to be about predictive analysis through the AI tools so that you're actually ahead of the curve rather than taking time with bigger organisations, taking more time, bringing down old structures. So I think pace of change is just going to continue to hasten.
And I think what you're saying there is really the AI is the tool or the enabler to help us go with that pace, but also to enable us to do things better, easier, faster, differently. There's all sorts of different ways you can look at it. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where that all goes. And listeners, if you're a leader who's not yet wanting to know about AI, I'm going to highly encourage you to start learning and understanding. You don't have to be the expert. You just have to have an awareness and understanding of how that tool or those tools can help you, your organization, going forward, which is the smart thing for you to do.
Yeah, just get in and start playing with it. That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
It's going to be the way of the world.
Yeah. Nice. The way of the world. Very good. Now, you and I have James, been talking about through the lens of leadership. We're going to change lenses and talk a little bit about employees. You've been an employee. You've had employees working for you as well in the past. Has employees' expectations of leaders changed?
Well, I'm fond of using analogies, Dennis, as you've probably quickly picked up. I like to use a sporting team analogy how sporting teams were coached in the past. And again, it comes back to really leadership, a bit the old command and control. The coaches of the past too line all the players up, the ladies or the guys in the team along the line. There's a brick wall, 15 metres in front. When I say go, I want you all to charge through that brick wall. The old style was no questions were asked. The team would simply run through the brick wall. Today, the teams that line up on that line, before they go and run through the brick wall, they want to go up, look at the brick wall, they want to touch it, feel it, go around the side and have a look at the wall, go around the back, come back, ask the coach some questions about the brick wall, how it was actually made, constructed, and then they'll line up on the line, and when the coach blows the whistle, we'll run through the brick wall. So it's again, people wanting to participate, want to be engaged in the process rather than the command and control. And that's the expectation of people today. Like, you spend a lot of your working life at work, a lot of your life at work. You want to be engaged. You want to have some input. You want to be involved with an organisation that's green and growing. You don't want to be involved in something that's red, ripe and rotting.
Nice. I think going back to the analogy you used before, go out to the car and get your brain out of the boot of the car or and use it, right? And I think that's what people are wanting to do. And they're wanting to have input. They want to be able to see, because they're not taking things for granted, or just because they've been told something, they're actually not questioning it, not undermining it. They want to understand it more, because there could be a better way of doing it.
Exactly.
Or
yeah,
even, is that the right wall we should be looking at, or is there another wall?
Yeah, that's right. Will we get better results running through that wall there, or should we run over to that other wall over there?
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know how you've been using metaphors. I use one as well for this last question, which is around getting a crystal ball out, thinking about the future. Where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Well, certainly there will be more women in leadership, which is a good thing. And the way of the world, increasingly there will be greater representation of people from diverse cultural backgrounds across increasingly diverse cultural teams, which again is a good thing. Touched on AI before. There's going to be increased adaptive learning of all people within organisations as leaders, and the application of AI is going to collapse space and time. And for me, I see leadership increasingly being a little bit like the internet, how it's a distributed network, that leadership will be within a dynamic cell. There'll be less middle management and greater disbursement of team leadership to network nodes, where everyone's focused on the inner core vision of the organisation, the purpose or being of that organisation. And I mentioned earlier that over time we've seen the pace of change increase and product life cycles decrease, that organisations will continually need to be adaptive and flexible and quick to change and ready to pull down old structures that don't work. And as I said, predictive analysis about being ahead of the curve of change. We are living in increasingly dynamic times of change where, to me, the essence of everyone being a leader will truly optimise organisational life.
Great way of putting it. Great way of bringing that to an end as well. James, I like what you said there as well about the inner core vision and working on that. And so there you go, listeners. It's about increasing the adaptive learning and learning so much more about things and applying it. James, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. If people wanted to get hold of you, where should they go?
Simply just email me at james@workpod.com. So pod is WRKPOD.com. You can simply telephone me if you like, 161 +61 407 349 782. And also I can be found on LinkedIn, James Thompson, at the end of my title, GAICD, so Graduate Australian Institute of Company Directors. So James Thompson, because there's Thompsons everywhere, GAICD.
Excellent. We'll put those links into the show notes, so it's making it easier for our listeners for them to go to as well. But James, once again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you about leadership is changing today, so thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Excellent. Well, there you go, listeners. Well, it's time for you to think about things. Are you going to sink or are you going to swim as a leader in your role? Make sure that you always are getting in your helicopter to get that view of what's actually going on within your organization by actually understanding the different cultures that you may have in the organization. Are you a leader that's been found yet? In other words, leadership can find you even though you may not want to be found. It's quite interesting, that whole concept that we talked about. Well, the question is this: how will you approach the brick wall? Thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.